Hello, everyone. This video is a re-recording of a video I made a few days ago. I realized after I uploaded that video that I made some mistakes in it, and I just decided to private that video and record a new one. So if you watch that video, this video is pretty similar. Today, I wanted to talk a bit about Charlie Kirk. And for those who don't realize or don't know, uh, I live in deep, deep red territory, which is why it's unsafe for me to reveal my identity, which is why I'm recording in the dark. So, to give a little bit of a backstory of sort of where I'm going to go with this video, uh, uh, when I heard Charlie Kirk got assassinated, I pretty much immediately went to my family's house and I talked with my sister about it, my younger sister. She was in the kitchen and she was like scrolling on her phone, and she was kind of like her eyes are kind of misty, like you could see that she had been crying. And so I talked to her and I'm like, "Hey, like what's going on?" And she was saying that a lot of her friends from college were making fun of Charlie Kirk and she just thought it was horrible. And I said something I should not have said. I was a little low on sleep, which is not a good excuse, but I told her I was like, "Well, it is a bit ironic." And she's like, "Ironic? What do you mean?" And I told her, and I kind of regret telling her this, but I was like, "Well, Charlie Kirk, you know, he talked often about gun control and how it's important, or how he's okay with people dying as a consequence for, you know, having virtually no gun control." And she got really upset at me, which is kind of understandable. I was not aware at the time, which I am now. I was not aware of just how deeply affected people in Christian evangelical circles, uh, how deeply affected people are about this situation. And as soon as I said that, she was like, "Well, like what you mean?" And I was like, "Well, Charlie Kirk, he wasn't a good guy." And I was a little confused because understood and understand Charlie Kirk to be a far right wing spokesperson who advocated for violence on many occasions, especially towards LGBTQ plus people. And I knew that people on the right liked him, but I didn't realize how emotionally attached people were to this guy. And it seems like a lot of people sort of had a parasocial relationship with Charlie Kirk, almost like someone you knew personally, or like your local pastor died, because in my head, I thought, okay, if a content creator that I watched suddenly got murdered, I would be upset about it, but I wouldn't feel like someone I personally knew got their life taken. Like it. What I'm trying to say is, people on the right are taking this so incredibly personally. On Facebook groups, on different right wing chat groups that I'm a part of, people who pretty much never post anything are posting like every 30 minutes, every hour, these like memorial videos of Charlie Kirk. And I'm kind of blown away of just how much this guy meant to so many people. And it's pretty disturbing considering who Charlie Kirk was. When I was trying to explain these things to my younger sister, she's in college. My sister told me, she's like, "Hey, I listen to Charlie Kirk all the time, and you're telling me that he's a racist. How come I never realized that he's a racist if I listen to this guy all the time?" And I didn't want to tell her that it's probably because she has some racist views that she may not realize. But I tried explaining to her that Charlie Kirk sort of rationalized a lot of his racist views. He cite certain certain statistics and sort of cherry pick different extrapolations that you could take from different statistics to then suggest a very racist viewpoint. And if you're not careful, you can sort of fall into a way of thinking that is pretty racist, but you don't feel like you're being racist because you just feel like it's the truth. And to be clear, and I told my sister this, I think it's absolutely terrible that he got assassinated. I don't want to live in a world where you can just kill somebody because you disagree with them. I think that's a terrible precedent to set. And I think it's a terrible tragedy that, the debate is essentially over with Charlie Kirk. His words are basically being eternalized, and we can never sit down and have a conversation with Charlie Kirk ever again. And also think it's terrible to celebrate someone's death. I don't think you should celebrate someone that got murdered because you're essentially dehumanizing that person, which is something that we on the left should be against. We should be against dehumanizing someone. And a part of realizing someone's humanity is to acknowledge that their death is also a tragedy. But at the same time, it is weird to sort of turn someone into a saint when they lived a life that was pretty terrible. To give a comparison, that one CEO several months ago that got assassinated, that CEO of some uh, health insurance company, I would also say that that was a tragedy, that he should not have been assassinated, and that is uh, certainly not how you go about your disagreements, of course. But the reaction to that person's death was, there was a lot of celebration, which I thought was kind of messed up. But also, you're not mourning the guy's death because you know that that guy lived a life that was just horrible. And so that's sort of my mindset about Charlie Kirk's death. You don't celebrate it, but you don't turn him into some sort of godly figure. But that is what the right is doing. Even people that are casual, quote unquote, casual about politics, but would probably say they're conservative and Republican. These people are glorifying Charlie Kirk when I think a lot of them don't even realize everything that he stood for. I think a lot of people just think of him as a very godly Christian man because they saw some TikTok about Charlie Kirk quoting a Bible verse. And then people will think, oh, well, he must be such a godly Christian man. And so, of course, we should mourn his death like a martyr. So I think there's a lot of people that just don't know who Charlie Kirk was. But then on the other hand, you have people who liked Charlie Kirk because of all of his racism. There's several people on Facebook and in these various uh, Republican chats that I'm in who will post, a memorial to Charlie Kirk. And then in the comments, you see people saying, hey, we shouldn't celebrate this guy. He constantly targeted Black communities and villainized Black communities. And then, the person who made that post will then request evidence like, hey, if you saying Charlie Kirk is a racist, give me some evidence. And then the response will be some quote that Charlie Kirk had or a clip of him saying something super racist. And then the person who made the post agrees with it. And they say, well, I actually agree with Charlie Kirk. And they sort of do what I was saying earlier about my sister, where they sort of rationalize the racism. They'll say, oh, well, I'm not racist, but the reason I'm judging someone's competency based on the color of their skin is because of DEI. Like they sort of rationalize these racist viewpoints. Or the reason why uh, I get nervous every time I, walk around someone who's Latino is because it's a quote unquote proven fact that these people are dangerous, right? So even though that's completely false. Um, Charlie Kirk definitely manipulated and cherry-picked his data to make his racist talking points. But you sort of see this happen where you try to talk about all of these horrible views that Charlie Kirk had and all of these extreme right. I mean, Charlie Kirk used like KKK talking points of like the Great Replacement theory, and he sort of normalized that in his speeches and in his words. And so you have all, he'd say constantly, if you're white, get married as young as you can, have kids as early as you can, and have as many kids as you can to preserve the white race. I mean, he was very open with a lot of these very racist views. And it's very disturbing to see how much he's being celebrated across America. But if you try to make these points to a conservative or especially a Christian evangelical, they'll just completely block you off, and it's like you can't really communicate with them because they're so emotional about the subject. Um, and Christians are crying martyrdom right now. I mean, there's so many people that I've talked to personally. My dad, some people at my local church that I still talk to, and my older brother were saying that Christians are under attack. They think that Christians are being targeted, even though we don't know exactly what the motive of the shooter is yet. And Charlie Kirk was an incredibly divisive person. I mean, he constantly, like I said, targeted LGBTQ plus communities, Black communities. He was a very divisive person who was also a Christian. And, all of these Christians just assumed that he was being targeted for his faith. And there's a little bit about that I want to talk about, because a lot of people will combine their right wing talking points and they'll sort of link it with their faith. And so if someone, let's say, was pro LGBTQ, and let's say they assassinated Charlie Kirk based on those talking points, people would then say that, well, Charlie Kirk got assassinated for his Christian values, or if someone wanted to, let's say the motive of the killer was over Charlie Kirk saying on multiple occasions that the Civil Rights Act was a mistake. And let's say that was the motive. Christians would say, well, Charlie Kirk once again got killed for his Christian values. So they sort of link their political views with their Christian views. So a lot of people are saying that Charlie Kirk is a Christian martyr. And I find that very confusing, because Charlie Kirk, of all of his viewpoints, at least in my view, were very unchristian. But he said a lot of Christian words, he said a lot of verses. And so it's like people, at least in these Christian evangelical circles, are sort of just taking all of those moments of Charlie Kirk saying a Bible verse and ignoring all of the racist stuff that he said and all of the very hateful things that he said, and sort of just believe his words over his actions. Because, there were a few people who I showed those videos and those clips and those quotes to. And, just like Donald Trump, they just kind of were like, well, I disagree with that, but, Charlie Kirk is an imperfect vessel. So there's a lot of angles here where either A, people are agreeing with Charlie Kirk with his racist views, or they're just choosing to ignore all of the hurtful things that Charlie Kirk said, or they're just oblivious to it and have no idea who the guy is, but are just now learning about who he is and are seeing sort of the mainstream media mourn him, and, the president of the United States putting all of the flags at half mast. And so you have all of this going on, of all of this mourning and celebration of Charlie Kirk's life that's taking place in right-wing circles. But then, and this is where it gets a little weird, well, I guess a little more weird, is a lot of the reaction to the right is also anger, and specifically anger towards people on the left. And once again, we still are not totally sure of what the shooter's motive motives are. I have a lot of reason to believe that he was a right-wing Nazi, particularly a Groyper. I think a lot of the stuff that he said or that he had on his bullet casings suggests that. I'm also in a lot of Nazi Discord groups, which I'm not going to tell you what groups those are, but yes, I am in those groups because I want to be aware of what's going on. But a lot of people in those groups were first claiming him and sort of celebrating the Charlie Kirk shooting. They're starting to doubt it recently, but there's certainly reason to believe that he was a right-wing Nazi. The Groyper community often beefed with Charlie Kirk's community. And then you have the whole thing that's coming out now where the shooter seems to have been in a relationship with a trans person. And it seems not a lot of people realize this, but there is a section of the online Groyper community that is weirdly kind of pro-trans in a very misogynistic way, where you have Nick Fuentes, who's the leader of the Groypers, the well-known online Nazi, saying things like having a relationship with a woman is gay, which is a self-defeating statement, but logic isn't exactly something Nazis are known for having. There is a section of this Nazi community where it's sort of encouraged for guys to be in relationship with trans women or feminized men because they just hate women that much. It's really weird. Um, but anyway, I'm getting off topic. There is reason to believe that the shooter was not at all left wing, but that doesn't stop the right wing from just targeting people on the left for being guilty for the assassination. And I'm seeing this in conversations I'm having in real life. My older brother, for example, was saying that he does not feel safe anymore because he's an evangelical pastor. He was saying that he does not feel safe anymore, and he sort of looks at everyone as if to wonder if they're targeting him, and it's sort of creating even more hatred. This idea causing even more hatred between the left and the right, and I'm seeing a lot of conservative people um, sort of just assume that if you're on the left, that means you're more prone to violence, even though that's not what the statistics suggest. And with all of this talk of Charlie Kirk sort of being this martyr for Christianity, it's sort of turning him into what I believe is going to be the MLK of the right. You know, people are so emotional over the situation that people are both saddened and they're letting all of that distress turn to anger. And I think a lot of that is causing this sort of uh, lionizing of Charlie Kirk. And I wanted to quickly add there was a few people in the comment section of the first rendition of this video that were saying that MLK was actually the conservatives' version of MLK because MLK was a Republican. And I just want to say that's a pretty silly argument to make. I mean, it was the Republicans that were constantly against the Civil Rights Act and the Civil Rights Movement. Charlie Kirk, ironically enough, constantly criticized MLK, saying that we shouldn't have a holiday for him and that we shouldn't be celebrating MLK. I mean, it's just really silly. I mean, conservatives and Christians and Republicans today uh, very much dislike MLK. So that's just a silly argument. I just wanted to add that real quick. Um, but to kind of transition a little bit from all of that emotion that Christian evangelicals specifically are having, I wanted to talk a little bit about all of the all of the conversation about civil war, which I think is a little bit over the top. I don't think we're going to have a civil war anytime soon. I think that's a little excessive to really talk about as if it's something that's going to happen. However, I do think it is worth pointing out as someone that has lived in this very deep red Christian conservative environment. I was raised here. Um, that people on the right have been fantasizing about civil war for many, many years. I can remember back to the time when my older brothers would fantasize when they were practicing shooting. They would fantasize shooting like Barack Obama, for example, and it was just a joke. Everyone just kind of pretended it was a joke, but was a very legitimate fantasization of shooting liberals. And you can't help but look at a lot of these online right wing creators that are pretty much falling for civil war. I remember when that movie came out, I want to say a year or two ago, called Civil War, and me and my dad and my brothers all watched it, and they were disappointed that it wasn't violent enough because they sort of thought that the movie was implying that the good guys were the conservatives, in America, and it was just very weird. Like I went into it thinking, okay, we're gonna watch like an entertaining movie, and they thought it was supposed to be like a movie representing what America could be, and they were sort of it was weird. It was like they were fantasizing about Civil War. So I just wanted to mention that because there's a lot of talk about people advocating for civil war, and I just wanted to mention that yes, it is true. As someone who is in these deep red circles, that people on the right uh, are itching for it and do fantasize it a lot. So that's kind of a depressing note to end on, but that's pretty much everything. So thanks for listening.